So, get this. I'm 8 months pregnant, and I'm being kicked out of my house by my father to live on the streets, all because my new vile stepmother told him to. I, 22 female, gave birth to a beautiful baby boy 1 year ago. He's the absolute light of my life, and I do anything for him. But my pregnancy was not an easy one. As soon as my baby's father heard that I was pregnant, he left me. And since I was living with him in his apartment, I had to move out ASAP. My mother passed away a few years ago, so I went to live with my dad for a while. He was honestly really happy to have me. He always wanted grandchildren, and since I'm his only child from his marriage to my mom, I'm his first real chance at that. The issue wasn't with my dad, as I said he was thrilled to have me, but it was with his wife who had the problem. My dad began dating Clara, who's 37, only a few months after my mom died. It's been a real point of contention between us. I do suspect that my father was cheating on my mother before she died. However, I have not brought it up to him because I don't want to cause more problems in my life. He's the only parent I have left, and I didn't want to start a fight, especially not with Clara around, whispering in his ear. Dad and Clara got married a few months before I got pregnant, so I was nervous about moving in with them because Clara and I have never gotten along. She's always hated me because I look a lot like my mother, and I think it's some sort of jealousy thing, like she never measures up to the first wife. I've tried to talk to my dad about this, but he's never receptive and just blows me off. I was feeling very alone, and Clara wasn't helping. She was sort of causing little fights between me and my dad. She would complain to him and about me leaving dirty dishes in the sink and tell him that I should be chipping in on the household bills. I would say little things in passing about my mom, and somehow they would always get back to him with a completely different meaning than how I actually said it. It would just cause tension around the house between all three of us, and it wasn't like she was doing it openly, so there wasn't really anything to blame for her. I want to bring it up with my dad, but I knew that I would just sound crazy. He's very defensive of his relationship with her, and I think it's because he knows that I know that he was cheating on my mom. I tried to keep everything inside just because I didn't want to cause myself any more stress than necessary. Obviously, just because it wouldn't be good for the baby. I was pretty much going to be a single mother, so I didn't want to alienate the only support system that I had. I was able to put up with Clara for the most part because she works long hours, so I didn't have to see her very often. It was usually only for the weekends that we really had a problem, because we would both be cooped up together in the house unless she had plans or I had a doctor's appointment or something. My dad isn't a confrontational guy, so he was no help when it came to our arguments. He would usually hole up in his man cave to avoid all the tension. Everything sort of came to a head when I was 8 months pregnant. I was largely on bed rest because of the complications with the pregnancy, but I could take short walks around the house or to the bathroom. I'll admit that I was probably leaving a mess in my wake, just because I couldn't really pick things up and I was tiring out very quickly. Just about any activity would send me to bed, so I was relying on my dad a lot to take care of things for me. He said that he didn't really mind, and I don't think he did, but his helping me really did take time away from his relationship with Clara. I think she started to feel a little bit neglected because she started acting out and shouting at my dad almost every night when he got home from work. There would be all these big arguments every night, and I could hear from my mom, and they were always about me. Clara said that he was spending far too much time with me rather than her son, my half-brother, who was only 3 at the time. This was the cause of another issue that we had. See, my dad obviously wasn't charging me rent or anything to stay with him, which Clara also did not like. So she decided that while they were at work, it would be my responsibility to take care of my little brother. I didn't have a problem with this at first, but as my pregnancy went on and we discovered the complications, I just was not up to the task anymore. All of my energy was completely drained. I had no energy to spare, and he's really energetic little boy. So, when I told Clara that I would not be able to babysit for her anymore, she sort of blew up on me. She told me that I was freeloading, that I was taking advantage of my father's kindness, and that I was trying to push myself away from his new family. Honestly, I didn't know what to say to that because it was such a ridiculous thing to say, as I couldn't rely on my own father anymore just because he's gotten remarried and had another child with somebody other than my mom. I expected my dad to defend me, which was stupid because he never has spoken against Clara for me before. I don't know, I just kind of expected him to at least stand up for me when she was attacking my position as his daughter. But he just stood there and looked sort of annoyed. It ended up becoming sort of a screaming match. It was against me and Clara, and honestly, I was just so sick of the way she had been acting that I just opened the floodgates and told her exactly what I thought of her. I do admit that things I said weren't exactly kind, and I was being disrespectful of her relationship with my father. But after I said my piece, she absolutely lost it and began to scream at me, yelling at me to get out of her house. I expected my dad to step in again, foolish of me, but he wouldn't even look at me. He didn't say a thing while his wife was berating me at the top of her lungs. I sort of thought it was a joke at first, and I didn't think that even Clara would kick an 8-month pregnant woman out onto the streets. But she said it and she meant it, and I had to get out of there. The first night I spent in my car, luckily it was summer at the time so I didn't freeze to death. But I spent the entire night sobbing and wondering what I would do. I was scared that all of the stress would harm the baby, and I barely had any money because I'd been unable to work due to the complications. I texted a lawyer friend of mine and told her the exact situation. She told me that legally they could not kick me out of the house because 50% belonged to my mother, whose name was still on the deed, and that since she had left me everything, I legally owned half the house. I went back the next day and told them this, but Clara just laughed at me and told me that I would never be able to afford to bring them to court for this, that I barely had enough money to feed myself. I looked at my dad, who was hiding behind her, basically cowering, but again, he just would not look me in the eyes. I spent the next few weeks in our local women's shelter. I never thought that I was the type of person who would need to use one of those services, or that my father would allow me to be put in such awful circumstances, especially by his wife. After a few really terrible weeks in the shelter, I managed to get in touch with my cousin on my mom's side. We went close as kids, but I knew that she had a spare room. I hadn't really been in contact with my mom's family since she passed away, not because of anything they did wrong, just because it was a really painful reminder of my mother's death. So, I hadn't spoken to any of them in about 3 years, and they were shocked at what happened. My cousin invited me to stay with her immediately, thank goodness, and she told her mother, my aunt, everything that they've gone down. My aunt was absolutely livid with my dad. They were also so helpful during the last few weeks of my pregnancy. They helped with the medical bills, and my uncle offered to go to my dad's house in my stead, to pick up all the baby things that I left there. It felt surreal to have a family that actually cared again, after my dad had pretty much abandoned me completely. Eventually, I gave birth, and while it was really difficult to do labor, my son came out perfectly healthy. He was absolutely perfect, better than I could have dreamed or hoped for, and my mom's side of the family were absolute superstars. I couldn't have done it without them, and I don't think that either my son nor I would have survived without all of their help. Unfortunately, I had quite a bad postnatal depression for a few months after I gave birth, and I struggled a lot with some really dark thoughts. If it weren't for them, I would have stayed in bed all day, but they managed to help me come out of the darkness and begin to live my life again with my son. My dad did try to contact me when he found out that I was in labor, and he showed up at the hospital without Clara, but I refused to see him. Over the past year, he's tried multiple times to contact me, and has even been begging me to allow him to see his grandson. He's even been contacting his in-laws, my mom's family, and begging them to talk to me into seeing him. Thankfully, all of them are so angry with him, not just for allowing Clara to kick me out, but for moving one on from my mother so fast. He's even shown up to my cousin's house where I'm staying and banged on the door, begging me just to forgive him. well, apologizing and making such a huge scene. I eventually opened the door and I told him that I would not be allowing him to see my son, and I would call the police if he did not leave ASAP. Well, he didn't leave, so I ended up watching him be escorted off the lawn by 2 policemen. My son's a year old now and he's thriving. My aunt runs a daycare out of her house and takes care of him at a discount. My cousin's still allowing me to stay with her and refuses to charge me rent. Once my son turned 6 months old, I began to look for work. I had to drop out of college when I got pregnant, so I found it difficult to find a well-paying job at first. Eventually, I found 2 part-time jobs that pay just above the minimum wage. My cousin also pays me to babysit her daughter on the weekends while she goes out with her husband. I'm still not making much, but I'm doing a lot better than I was. I've not seen my father ever since I had to call the police on him, but he's still been texting me and calling me almost daily, as well as my family, begging me again and again to allow him visitation with my son. I've begun to feel guilty for cutting him off so completely, not just for his own sake, but for my son's. Because of my ex wants nothing to do with me or his own son, there's only one grandparent available for my boy. I don't know, I feel as if it's not fair for me to take that away from him. I also feel bad for my dad because I know how manipulative Clara can be, and I know that. It just wasn't his idea to kick me out. But at the same time, I can't forgive him for just standing there, allowing her to kick me out of the house I grew up in, the house my mother used to live in, the house I legally have a right to. I've spoken to my cousin and my aunt had a few friends, and they all told me that I had every right to refuse to see him. I think that I take my friends' advice on this more to heart rather than the family's, because I know their judgment could be clouded by the resentment they have towards my dad. I'm trying to come at this from the most neutral place possible, just so that my son can have at least one grandparent in his life, but the anger in me at my dad's silence bubbles every time I even consider calling him. What's up guys, Mr. Reddito here. So that was the end of the original post, but OP did come out with another update, and it's about Clara having a spending problem. I hope you guys are having a great day. Let's go ahead and hop into this update, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, just do me a favor if you want to support me and click that big ol' red subscribe button, and let's hop into this update. So, as it turns out, Clara has a little bit of a spending problem. My guilty conscience finally got the best of me, and I finally answered my father's phone calls. I was planning on allowing him to meet my son on a provisional basis, but he interrupted me before I could even finish speaking. Apparently, the real reason that he's been calling me is to ask for money, because Clara's shopping addiction has run through all his savings and they're in danger of losing the house. I was mostly confused because my parents paid off their mortgage while I was very young. But apparently Clara convinced my father to take out a new mortgage to fund her spending habits. She's gone through all of that money, that she has quit working, and my father has recently been fired from his job. They're struggling now to pay the bills, and apparently Clara and my father have been going hungry so they can afford to feed my brother. But the little money that they do have is running dry pretty quickly. I don't really know what to think. I think I'm in a little bit of shock while on the phone. My dad spent the entire time bemoaning his own situation. He did not ask me once how I was doing, and he didn't even ask about my son. I was under the impression that the reason he had been calling and calling was that he wanted to see his grandson, but apparently not. I feel bad for myself, but I feel worse for my son, who deserves a grandfather who actually wants to see him, not one who uses him as an excuse to beg for charity. There's no way in heck that I'm giving him money. Even if Clara wasn't in the picture, he wouldn't be getting a dime from me. He stood by and allowed his wife to kick me out while I was 8 months pregnant. He allowed me to go homeless, allowed me to sleep in a car, allowed me to stay in the shelter, and now he acts like I owe him something. It's ridiculous is what it is. Again, I've spoken to my mom's side of the family about this, and this time I'm willing to take their advice. At first, I was hesitant to only listen to them just because I know that they dislike my dad already, and that they have no way of being objective and unbiased, but now I think they're justified. I'm just so disgusted that my father would risk the home that I grew up in, the home that he chose with Mother, and take out another mortgage just to appease to his little trophy wife. Honestly, it feels like a betrayal beyond everything he's done before. While I disapproved of him getting into a relationship and marrying Clara so quickly at my mother's death, I couldn't fully blame him, because we cannot help who we fall in love with. But now he has knowingly and willingly disrespected my mother's memory. The only one who does not deserve the situation is my little brother. We became quite close during my pregnancy, and I've been missing him since they kicked me out. It's not his fault that he has the beast of a woman for a mother. Still, it's not my responsibility to look out for him. I have my own family to care for now, and I've blocked my dad's number. I'm hoping that I can just get past all this and enjoy my life from here on out. Alright guys, Mr. Reddito here. So it's been a little while since this OP decided to make an update, but just so you know, there is a few more updates in the chamber. So let's go ahead and jump into update number 2. It starts with this. Hey guys, thanks for all the awards and kind messages. They've really made me smile, and I'm just hoping to update everybody on the situation. While I blocked my father's number, I did not block Clara's just because I never thought that she would contact me in a million bajillion years. I was pretty sure that as far as she was concerned, I didn't even exist anymore. But apparently, that animosity doesn't exist when she needs money. I did not have the number saved to my phone, so I didn't know how to ignore the phone when it came in. I answered, and it was as if butter would not melt. She has this fake sniveling voice on, and I didn't even recognize her at first, especially without that nasty tone she's always saved for me. She was lying on the waterworks, sobbing about how scared she was, how worried she was for my brother, how stressed my father seemed, and the only reason that I did not hang up as soon as I recognized her voice was that I was in such shock that she was even contacting me. I knew that their situation was desperate, but I don't think I really understood how serious it was, until she sucked up her pride and called me herself. At this point, I was starting to feel a bit guilty, and I felt like maybe I should help them. I felt like I should be the bigger person, forgive and forget, and sort everything out. But as soon as I began to have those thoughts, I remembered the night that I spent in my car alone, scared and crying, hoping that my dad would back me up the next day. But then, once I got there, he just stood there, eyes on the floor, allowing her to scream at me. I do believe that at first he was contacting me out of a real desire to meet his grandson. But I think that once the money troubles begin to show, his reason shifted to something a little more selfish. So, there I was, hearing this woman wail like a banshee into my ear, thinking about everything she put me through. I could have lost my son, I could have been robbed, anything could have happened to me on the streets, and she wouldn't have cared one little bit. But now, as soon as it's her that needs a little bit of help, family looks out for each other, right? Now, I wanted to say all of this. I wanted to drag her over the phone, but I just don't want to be that sort of person. The sort of person who steps on people when they're down. Exactly the sort of person she is. In fact, I don't want to make the current situation any harder on her than it has to be, just because I don't want to stoop to her level. So while I'll not be helping her or my father, I won't kick her while she's down. So I just calmly explained that I would not be sending her any money, and I hung up the phone. Within about 5 minutes, I had almost 30 text messages from her, ranging from attempted emotional manipulation and just flat-out insults. And, well, nastiness. I caught myself wondering if my father knew that she was contacting me. But I realized that I was deluding myself if I thought that he would stop her from being so abusive. So I just blocked her number, and I'm going on about my day. Update number 3. So, I recently moved out of my cousin's house finally, and I managed to save enough for a deposit on a house. It's not a big house, but it's 3 bedrooms, and my son and I use one. 2 days ago, there came a big bang on my door. The baby was asleep and the noise woke him up, so I was already annoyed. But when I opened the door, I was even more annoyed. There stood my father, Clara, and my brother. They were standing there bundled up against the rain with huge suitcases, and I thought I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation or something. But after a few good blinks and a couple pinches, I verified they really were there. Now, listen, it was raining really heavily, and I'm not about to leave anybody out in the rain, no matter what they've done. Especially my brother, who only turned 4 last month, and I haven't seen in over a year. I invite them in and try to at least play the gracious host, because I know they're about to ask me to stay here, and I wanted to at least warm them up before I sent them packing. It looked like my dad already knew what the answer was going to be. He still couldn't look me in the eyes and just let Clara do the talking for him. As usual, of course. She asked if they can stay just for a few days until they can get back on their feet. Now, I know that the house has been repossessed by the bank, and I know that they have no money and no family in the area, so I knew that the idea of them getting back on their feet so soon was absolutely ridiculous. I just let her talk. But nothing she said was going to change my mind, and I don't want revenge. And I don't wish anything bad to happen to them, but I'll be darned if I went out of my way to help them. When she finished speaking, it went really quiet for a while. I think that both of them were trying to stay quiet because they knew if they spoke, it'd probably go against them. But while it was quiet, I began to look at my brother. Gosh, he looks absolutely exhausted. There were big dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he was about to cry. My heart absolutely began to break. I knew then that I could not turn him away in good conscience, so I decided, I don't care what my dad or Clara go through, but I will not allow a little boy to go homeless if I can help it. I looked them in the eyes and I said flat out that I would not be helping them. I told them they could not stay here and I would never forgive them for what they've done. I told them, though, that they were lucky I even let them in the door. I said that once they finished their drinks, I'll be expecting them to leave promptly, and I told them that I would give them the number for the women's shelter that I had to stay at once they kicked me out, and that Clara could stay there. I told my dad that he could sleep in his car just like I had to. I told them that the only help that they would be getting from me is an offer to take care of my little brother until they had somewhere else to live. I told them that the fact that they allow their infant son to lose his home and stability over a shopping addiction was absolutely disgusting. Clara lost it. She was screaming at me again, but this time it was in my own darn house, and I would not be having it. I sent my brother into the living room to play with my son and his toys while I gave Clara a real piece of my mind. I told her she was a gold digger. I told my father that he was a pathetic, weak little man, a doormat, and that he had disrespected my mother and that he disrespected me by allowing this monster, vile creature of a woman to go back into him losing everything. I didn't shout because I didn't want the kids to hear me. I just clearly and rationally told them exactly what they were, which was pathetic, idiotic, terrible parents with no sense of responsibility. I said that my offer would only be given once, and that if they choose to decline, they would have to find a way to keep him warm during the winter without a house or job between. I could tell that Clara was about to say no, that her pride would not allow her to accept my help. But finally, for once, my stepdad. He stepped in and told me they'd accept the offer. My dad dragged Clara out of the house, and he told me that he would drop off my brother's things in the next couple of days. And, well, they did. Dad must have spoken to Clara because when they came to drop off his clothes and toys, she was behaving herself for once. I'm glad that she didn't make a scene in front of the children. I don't want my son to have to see all that, and I know that it wouldn't help my brother's situation to see his mother hysterical. I feel like he has to deal with a lot of instability in his short little life due to his parents, and, well, I won't contribute to that if I can help it. So now I'm a single mother with 2 kids to take care of. It's been about a week now since my brother came to stay, and it's been really tough. I'm exhausted physically and mentally. 2 kids are so much more taxing than one, and my brother has so much energy all the time. Thankfully, my aunt's taken him in as one of her daycare students, allowing me to still work. Honestly, I couldn't do this without her, because without working, I could not afford to feed 3 mouths. None of the hostility that my aunt feels towards my father has been translated into hostility towards my brother, thank goodness. She's a good woman, and I know that she would not wish homelessness on any child. She's already become quite fond of my brother in the short time that she's known him. My brother does have some behavioral issues, and I'm finding it challenging to combat these behaviors. But honestly, I can't blame him for acting out. He's been shunted around for the past few months, and neither of his parents have come to visit him since he's been here. I've seen some improvement, and while it's hard, I'd rather this than have him on the streets or even in a shelter. One thing that's been bothering me is that my father was willing to speak against Clara for his son's sake and well-being, but not for mine. I can feel a lot of bitterness inside me every time I see my brother, and I know that Dad will speak up for him but not for me. But I've been trying very hard to make sure this doesn't come across in my attitude. It's difficult, but I'm trying, I'm struggling, but I'll do whatever is best for my family. I've heard from my dad once since he left my brother's things here, having unblocked his number once we reached that agreement. He asked how my brother was settling in, if he seemed happy, but didn't ask once about me or my son. It's exhausting still feeling this disappointment every time that he lets me down. I try not to, but every time we talk, I still hope that my dad is in there somewhere. But he isn't, and that's just something I have to learn to deal with. What's up, guys? Mr. Redito here, so the final update is a small one. It was not posted for some time, but it does wrap up the story, and it says this. It's been a few months now since my brother came to live with me, and we've settled into a pretty nice little routine. He shares a room with my son, and they just go to my aunt's house while I work. It's summer now, and my communications with my dad have been sparing, to say the least. He's contacted me maybe 5 times to check in on my brother, but he never updates me on how he's doing with the job hunt or where he's been staying. I haven't heard from Clara at all, and it's heartbreaking to hear my brother asking for her less and less as time goes by. But I'm sort of hoping that he can just forget her. I have a feeling that neither of them will be coming back for him anytime soon. I've honestly, though, made peace with the idea, and it's really hard at first. I think it's soothing the sting of my dad's abandonment a little to know I'm not the only one who he's a deadbeat father to, but it does still hurt on behalf of my brother. He just doesn't understand any of this. I just wanted to thank everyone who showed so many replies to the threads and gave me legal advice or just general support. You have no idea how much that means to me. Well, this will probably end here with no more updates, just because I want to focus on my work and family. Once again, thank you to everyone who read this and kept up with me during all this troubling time. So this was the most pathetic parents I've probably read in a really long time. I mean, the father was just an absolute doormat. Who kicks their child out while they're pregnant? Nowhere to go to the streets. And besides that point, after that was all said and done, he would just not stand up for himself. He was a complete floor mat. Guys, let me know your thoughts about this story. If you don't agree with me, that's totally cool. Just let me know your thoughts and opinions and what exactly you would have done differently. I think the only good thing that the father did in this story was allow the little boy to live with OP. Well, he never came back for him anyways. Guys, once again, thank you for tuning in. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and click that button, and Mr. Redito will catch you in the next one.